At the very heart of humanity's technological history, there is an invisible boundary that almost no one talks about. It separates two worlds. One is the familiar world of official progress, where technology steadily shapes the future, and the other is the world of inventions that disappeared before ever becoming part of that future. Ideas that could have changed the course of history appeared suddenly, amazed people with their potential, and then vanished without a trace, without explanation, without development, as if they had never existed at all. And the most intriguing part is that this does not happen only in the past. Even today, some technologies disappear just as quietly, leaving behind only one question. Why do some inventions change the world, while others vanish forever? At the beginning of the 20th century, the world stood on the edge of a completely different reality. Engineers did not limit themselves with narrow boundaries. They thought on a grand scale. Electric cars were already moving through city streets. Pneumatic transport systems were being tested underground. People were becoming familiar with mechanisms that seem ordinary today, and some scientists were trying to transmit energy without a single wire. It was a moment when the future could have taken a completely different path. The electric vehicles of that era were surprisingly practical. They started instantly, ran quietly, produced no vibration, and required little maintenance. Thomas Edison was actively working on batteries that could make such cars widely available. And Detroit Electric was already producing models capable of traveling dozens of kilometers on a single charge. Even Henry Ford considered the idea of building an affordable electric car. And yet, these vehicles disappeared from the roads. The official explanation is simple and logical. Gasoline became cheaper, the internal combustion engine became more powerful, and oil infrastructure began expanding rapidly. But when you put all the pieces together, it starts to feel like this story may not be so straightforward. One alternative explanation points to the economic inertia of the system. At the beginning of the 20th century, huge financial structures were already forming around oil. Extraction, refining, transportation, and fueling networks. In that model, the electric car was not merely a competitor, but a potential disruption to an entire ecosystem of profit. Sometimes a technology does not need to be banned directly. It is enough for it to become less of a priority, less funded, and less visible. The electric car was too autonomous. It did not require complicated global logistics. It did not depend on constant fuel deliveries, massive infrastructure, or control over resource flows. In a world where the economy was just beginning to globalize, such independence may have looked not like progress, but like a threat to the system's manageability. There is also the technical explanation that is often presented as the main reason. The batteries of that era were heavy, slow to charge, and had limited lifespan. But this raises another question. Why was battery development not accelerated in the same way internal combustion engines were? Why did one technology receive an industrial breakthrough while the other remained on the margins? There is another, quieter explanation often mentioned in alternative historical analyses. Technologies do not always disappear because they are banned. Sometimes they disappear because other systems are not ready for them. Electric cars required a different energy infrastructure, different standards, and a different urban design philosophy. Perhaps the world simply was not ready for them yet. But then, the question returns. Why did the alternative system develop so quickly and so perfectly? And there is the least obvious explanation. Electric vehicles may have been ahead, not only of technology, but of society's understanding of mobility itself. The world still thought in terms of fuel, reserves, logistics, and servicing. Electric transportation required a different mindset. one based on constant access to energy, different habits, and a different culture of use. Sometimes society does not reject a technology. It simply fails to evolve quickly enough to accept it. Pneumatic transportation systems truly seem like they were pulled from an alternate version of history, where cities followed a completely different technological path. By the late 19th century, New York was already choking on horse-drawn carriages, noise, and traffic jams. At that moment, Alfred Ely Beach proposed a radical idea. Instead of building more streets, move transportation underground. This led to the experimental project known as Beach Pneumatic Transit. Beneath Broadway, he built a short but fully functioning tunnel. Inside was a small capsule that moved not by steam or electricity, but by air pressure. Powerful fans literally pushed the carriage through the tunnel, while a system of valves created the effect of smooth, nearly silent movement. Contemporaries described the experience as almost futuristic. A passenger would enter the cabin, and it would gently begin moving forward, without smoke, without rusty mechanisms, without the thunderous noise of the industrial age. It represented a different kind of city, cleaner, quieter, and more controlled. And the most remarkable thing was that the public loved it. The project did not merely function, it felt like a glimpse of the future that had somehow arrived too early. But this is where the mystery begins. Despite its successful demonstration, the system never became a citywide standard. The official explanations sound reasonable: lack of funding, difficulties in scaling, political resistance, and competition from other transportation solutions. At that time, cities quickly placed their bets on more universal technologies. First cable cars, and later electric subways. But there is another layer to this story, one that raises more questions than answers. Why did a working technology never receive broader development? Was the issue really just money and engineering? After all, pneumatic transportation had obvious advantages: minimal noise, no smoke, and a simple operating principle. Some historians of urban transportation point to something deeper. Such a system would have required an entirely different city infrastructure, a different approach to energy, logistics, and flow management. It would not merely have added a new mode of transportation, it would have changed the architecture of urban reality itself. And here the feeling of an unwanted technology appears again. Not because it was bad, but because it diverged too sharply from the already established direction of development. The story of Beach's pneumatic subway remains suspended between reality and an alternate timeline. It existed, it worked, and then it disappeared from the main line of transport evolution. The story of the monoped and the monowheel looks like another lost branch of transport development. As early as the beginning of the 20th century, engineers were experimenting with compact single-wheel vehicles that could have become convenient personal urban transportation. They were lightweight, economical, space-saving, and in many ways anticipated today's electric scooters and electric unicycles. Officially, these concepts were abandoned because of instability and difficulty of control, but the idea itself never disappeared. It simply returned decades later in the form of modern compact electric mobility. This is yet another example of how promising technologies may not vanish forever, but instead wait for the moment when the system is ready to adopt them. And that raises a familiar question. How many inventions has humanity already created, only to be unable to accept them at the time? Against this background, the story of wireless energy becomes even more mysterious. Nikola Tesla worked on a technology that still sounds almost like science fiction today: transmitting electricity wirelessly over long distances. His idea was to use the Earth itself and the atmosphere as conductors, sending energy without cables or conventional power grids. If it had succeeded, electricity could have become accessible almost anywhere. During his experiments, Tesla demonstrated astonishing results. Lamps lit up without being connected to wires. Energy was transmitted over distance, and the devices themselves looked so unusual that to people of that era, it seemed like magic. This was not just a new invention. It could have completely transformed the global energy system. To make this vision real, construction began on a massive tower that was meant to be the first step toward global wireless power transmission. The plan was extraordinary: to create a system capable of transmitting electricity without traditional power lines, opening entirely new possibilities for humanity. But at that exact moment, everything suddenly stopped. Funding was cut, the project was frozen, and the technology that could have changed the world was left unfinished. The official explanation was cost and technical difficulty. But to many, that explanation feels too simple. Because if such a technology truly could work, it would not only transform science, it would transform the very principle of energy control. When energy becomes available everywhere, it becomes difficult to regulate, difficult to sell, and even harder to use as an instrument of influence. And this is where the central mystery emerges. Was the project really shut down only because it was difficult? Or was the idea of free or nearly uncontrollable energy simply too dangerous for a system built on selling it? We do not know the full answer. But the story feels as if humanity stood on the edge of a monumental breakthrough that could have changed the future. And at that exact moment, that path was suddenly cut off. And here the story takes an unexpected turn. Because this is not only about the past. Even today, we see similar stories. One of the most controversial and mysterious examples is the story of Stanley Meyer. He claimed to have created a technology capable of changing the entire global energy market. A car that could run on ordinary water. According to him, a special system separated water into hydrogen and oxygen, and the resulting gas was used as fuel for the engine. If such a technology had truly worked as described, it would have been revolutionary. Water, one of the most abundant resources on Earth, could have become an energy source capable of replacing gasoline, oil, and gas. The idea sounded so astonishing that it generated enormous interest. Meyer demonstrated his car, explained the operating principle, and promised a breakthrough that could completely change the rules of the energy world. Because if a car could truly run on water, it would challenge the foundations of the entire fuel-based economy. But this is where the controversy began. The scientific community treated his claims with great skepticism. Many experts pointed out that splitting water into hydrogen requires more energy than can be recovered from the hydrogen afterward. This contradicted the basic laws of physics. From the standpoint of mainstream science, the system could not produce more energy than it consumed. Eventually, the matter reached court, where it was ruled that Meyer failed to prove the effectiveness of his technology. His claims were judged unproven, and the invention was considered to lack verified functionality. And such stories are not unique. There are inventors who build prototype engines with remarkable efficiency. There are designs that promise cheap or nearly free energy. There are technologies that could operate longer, simpler, and cheaper. Yet they never become mainstream. Why? Officially, complexity, lack of investment, and scaling difficulties. But there is another side. Patents can be used not only to develop technology, but also to block it. If a large company buys a technology, it can simply choose not to implement it. It can lock it away in the archives. And that raises another question. How many inventions already exist today, but we will never see them? And if we look even deeper into this shadowy side of technological history, it becomes clear that electric vehicles, pneumatic transport, and wireless power are only the tip of the iceberg. In reality, there were many more technologies that appeared, demonstrated potential, and then disappeared. Some of them seem like early versions of modern solutions. Others look like ideas that are still too bold even today. There were also experiments with trackless electric transportation powered not through overhead wires, but through induction from the roads themselves. The road itself became the power source. This meant that vehicles could move without batteries. The system seemed complicated, but also remarkably logical. And then it disappeared. Another little-known but fascinating idea was atmospheric engines, designed to use differences in temperature or pressure to generate energy. These were attempts to create machines that could operate almost without fuel, relying instead on natural environmental conditions. Some of these projects looked like early predecessors of modern alternative energy systems, but they were never developed further. And once again, the same question arises. Were they truly inefficient, or did they simply fail to fit the existing model? It sounds strange, but some experiments showed promising results. And yet, these ideas never became mainstream. Why? Perhaps because centralized communication systems are easier to control. Another field was the early attempt to create automated transportation. Ideas for driverless vehicles appeared long before modern technology. Some systems used magnetic guides or electrical signals to direct vehicles without human control. It sounded like science fiction, but these projects existed, and then they disappeared. And this leads to another thought. Perhaps many of these technologies were imperfect. Perhaps they genuinely had limitations. But when you look at how many of them appeared, how diverse they were, and how often they emerged only to vanish, it begins to feel as though technical limitations were not the whole story. It feels as though there is an invisible filter, a filter that decides which ideas survive and which disappear. And then the question becomes even deeper. Who or what is that filter? The market? Corporations? Governments? Or perhaps the system itself, shaping reality in ways that keep it controllable? Perhaps science itself can become a tool in the hands of officials. Ideally, science should be an independent method of testing facts, but in reality, it often depends on funding, institutions, and priorities. Research requires money, laboratories, and equipment, and that means that the direction of development is partly determined by those who provide the resources. That is why some fields are actively explored, while others remain ignored or untested for years. Through science, inconvenient discoveries can be dismissed very easily. It can become like a biased judge, supporting the conclusion chosen in advance. And when all these stories are placed side by side, they begin to look not like isolated events, but like fragments of another possible world. A world that could have existed, but for some reason remained only in the shadows. Why do you think such advanced inventions disappeared? Welcome to the comments, and don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video on our channel.